Hello Internet, and welcome to the latest videos in my Pure Speculation series, where I take a historical question or historical mystery and try to give my personal opinion of it completely without any particular kind of historical evidence, but basically on, well, yeah, pure speculation, which is my opinion about a given case. This time we'll look at the character of the Norse god Odin and whether or not he might have been based on, or at least partly inspired by, none other than Attila the Hun. Now, this might seem a weird combination since Attila was not really described as either Germanic nor tall, one-eyed, clad in grey, or wielding a great spear, but bear with me as I try to present the, well, not evidence for this particular theory, but just my thoughts on the matter. So yeah, enjoy. Now, it's not absolutely known in any way if Attila himself ever set foot in Scandinavia, but strong contact with the Huns definitely existed between the northern Germanic, shall we call them proto-Viking tribes, and the Huns. There are many Hunnish kings and Hunnish names appearing in the Icelandic sagas and other Nordic legends. It seems a Hunnish royal house sat on the throne of Sweden for several years, depending on how you read various names that seems to be definitely Hunnish in origins, though of course twisted to fit the northern tongues. Various heroes and kings fought with the Huns as mentioned, and there seem to have been many other connections, at least in the time frame where the Huns were a political power in Europe, which was, after all, no more than a few centuries. Though, of course, many tales can have stemmed back to the time when the Huns were pushing out from Central Asia and were forcing many of the tribes that would later become part of the Danish and Swedish nations from their original homes around the northern reaches of the Black Sea. The Huns, of course, have their major stronghold and European home in what is modern-day Hungary, but there is little historical doubt, however, that many tribes that later made up the northern nations were pushed up from that area, fleeing ahead of the Huns as they were driven from their original homelands. In Denmark, there are certain tales and traditions and legends that tell that Odin's seat in Denmark, when he was actually just a, northern king, was in the city or the area around Odense, a town on the Danish island of Funen. And there are also certain traditions that explains that when Attila actually invaded Denmark, he also had his seat in Odense. So there might be some links even before anything else. While there is no real and true historical evidence, there are some indication of a massive and fairly successful Hunnish invasion of Denmark and Sweden in the early to mid-5th century. Again, I mentioned earlier the royal house of Sweden, which often, at least in the legends, are described with Hunnish names, and again, certain legends also appear to show that the Huns actually invaded and took over parts of, if not most of, the Danish realms. This would have been exactly during Attila's lifetime and possibly even during his reign. Whatever else, if the Huns were there, their rule would of course have collapsed fairly quickly in the later disasters following the defeat of the Huns to the Romans at Chalon-sur-Marne and after Attila's death. Though, of course, some would naturally have remained and become part of the mixture of original Scandinavian stock and outside tribes being created as a sort of new amalgamation in this migration period. Like, for instance, how the name of the first legendary Danish king, Dan, might well have had its origins in some royal title in some of the arriving people being pushed in front of the Huns, as well as possibly connected to the river Don or Dnieper, as often thought by historians. Now, let's look at Odin for a second. I won't go over all the mythical stuff or all the Norse legends about him and the rest of the Asia pantheon. There are many places to get this info, and in fact, have you any interest in Northern history, you probably already know quite a bit about it. The Cliff Notes version, however, Odin is the king of the Norse gods and the father of many of the other gods, such as Thor and Balder and so on. He is often thought to have been inspired by Zeus or Jupiter and mixed with other Nordic traditions to have created the sort of both warrior, king, trickster god that we know today. The problem is that he doesn't really seem to have existed in the Nordic countries until the time of the migrations and later, which means exactly the period we're dealing with, namely the dominion of the Huns and the lifetime of Attila. Before that, the various areas mostly held their own local main deities, and the more popular ones in the north seem to have been Thor, Tyr, Frey, and Nerthus, a female sea deity who apparently later became the male sea deity Njord. Balder as well, possibly, though he might actually have been an actual king from this particular area, mixed with some sort of information or mangled rumors about Jesus to have created a new sort of god himself. Odin himself seemed to have mainly been a god in maybe parts of northern and middle Germany as Wotan, and only expanded, if you can say it like that, into Scandinavia in this time period, or even a bit later, going towards the Viking periods. So we can already now see how the Huns might have been instrumental in making the Odin character getting widespread, as their invasions forced various peoples who would then have already worshipped Wotan and kept their gods with them, of course, north to get into closer contact with the people already existing in Scandinavia. It does not, however, explain how some fairly random Germanic god could have been raised up above all the other existing Nordic gods, especially war and nature gods like Tyr and Thor. That's how we're gonna look at now. The German people that Odin started as Wotan at, or Woden, or however you pronounced it in Proto-Germanic, would have been in long contact with the Huns and may in fact have brought the gods with them from the Black Sea area, or at least have had him or their own god mixed with certain traditions coming in with refugees from the Black Sea area. For these people, the Huns could well have been seen as maybe even superhuman to some degree. They had better weapons, they had better horses, better tactics, and so on. They were literally annihilating or just pushing easily aside anyone who stood in their path, and as it was fairly natural for the time to deify powerful rulers, see Egypt and Rome, etc., 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 even if the traditions were perhaps a bit less widespread in the north, the most powerful Hun kings could well have been seen as more than human by their oppressed neighbors, or feared so at any rate. Then, as the real sort of Hunnish invasion of the north got underway, possibly under Attila either as king himself with Bleda, or as a Hunnish prince earlier under the rule of his uncles, as his forces overran even more and more tribes of the north, perhaps even combined armies of the north, he could very well have come to be seen as some godlike figure, and might in fact have been conflated in Germany with, or even the north, with the most southerly Wotan. He might even have been known in that name in the north, since that might have been how they heard of him, if the southern tribes have already started to sort of conflate him perhaps with their own god, or in the tales he might have been conflated with the own god further north. That could well have been his identity, basically. As he then conquered most of the Nordic area and set up his camps on Funen, he could then also have sent an invasion force to Sweden to explain various myths where Odin in Odense sends emissaries or family members or whatever to Sweden to gain land and power. Attila himself would soon have left the north to continue his career in southern Europe, eventually culminating in the Battle of the Catalonian Fields and the invasion of Italy that finished after the meeting with the Pope. But even after his forces had been withdrawn or ejected from the Germanic lands, the union of people that the Huns had caused would remain and coalesce into the later Danish and Swedish tribes that would then have retained their memory of the great god king Wotan. That god would then have taken on additional features as the new combined people developed their newer and later developed pantheon that became the Norse Viking gods, with this amazing god king as its head. So to summarize, Attila was a great conqueror king whose armies, well, not just his armies, but the Huns' armies with Attila as their greatest king, sort of accidentally created a new society and a new united people in the north of Europe by driving various refugees together and being remembered as this powerful god king who was mixed up with the Germanic god Woden and brought as that god into the north, later developed into the figure of Odin, king of the Aesir and father of gods. Probably that character was then being mixed with various godlings, influences from the Greco-Roman worlds, and probably some tricksters. There are some indications that Loki was actually originally a fairly powerful god, and certain of his traits might well have been mixed with into the trickster aspects of Odin, while of course maintaining Loki's own existence as witnessed of later. So it's not so much that Attila is Odin, it's that my theory is that he brought a somewhat obscure Germanic god into the limelight by being mixed up with him and then just basically being a huge and powerful conqueror. Well, that was it. I hope this interested you. As always, in this series, I have absolutely no real evidence for any of my assertions and speculations apart from the most basic of historical facts. And I'm absolutely sure that if any sort of real historians see these videos, they are quite prepared to strangle me with their own theories and with various written history books. This is my theory, however, and I hope it at least interested you. If you'd like to see more of this particular kind of stuff, please let me know. Until next time, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.